Looking forward to this evening's debate. We are particularly fortunate this evening in having two very effective guest speakers. To propose the motion, we have Ken Humphreys from the Brighton and Hove Humanist Society. Ken is a specialist in historical Jesus. He has made numerous appearances on television and in radio programmes, and has written a number of books, I do know, and has his own website, which has so far had something like 4 million hits, do I remember? So a well-known speaker on behalf of the humanist movement. And equally well-established and successful on my left, opposing the motion, is the Reverend Stephen Terry, who is the rector of the Aldrington Anglican parish, where he's been for something like 23 years, I understand. The other thing to tell you about Stephen is that he is actually a genuine Cockney, and he claims that he has the best job in the world. Without further ado, the topic for this evening, just to remind you, is that God is past it. Can I therefore invite Ken as the proposer to talk to us for 15 minutes to make the case?
Good evening. Just a few familiar faces, actually quite a few, and I do spend a lot of time not so much with God but with Jesus, which is me far more of a consuming subject. But of course we have to occasionally look at his Father, and so that's what we're doing this evening. Now, the topic I've been given is God past it? Which is of course a colloquial way of expressing something that I'll try to put a little bit more academically. Is God now irrelevant to life in the 21st century? I think that's what the proposition intends to say when is God past it? So, is he? Is he? Interestingly enough, there was an announcement only about a week ago that really caught my ear because I knew this debate was coming up. And it came from, of all people, and you probably remember it when I mentioned it, the Boy Scout movement. Yes, if you remember, only about a week ago, the Boy Scout movement announced that it would be dropping the Pledge of Allegiance to God in its oath. Now that was rather interesting. They decided to retain the pledge to the Queen, which I would have thrown out at the same time, but there they had this decision. Now, it was interesting to hear the spokesperson for the Boy Scouts make the comment that the reason for this change was to remain current, to stay in step with the changing times, to stay relevant. And now that's very interesting, because I can remember when I joined the Cub Scouts at quite a young age, and they wouldn't have me after I refused to attend the church parade on a Sunday. I was told that in order to be a Boy Scout, I had to agree to attend the church parade. And even as a rebellious 10-year-old, I said no, I wasn't going to do that, so I wasn't allowed to attend. Now, okay, I was perhaps the wave of something new then, because most people attended, but interesting enough, today the Boy Scouts don't want to pledge an allegiance to God. Now, they are obviously aware of recruitment and numbers and where the movement is going. And if we put that in a general picture, which we are fortunate enough to have revealed to us today in the census results now coming out, look what is happening in the general picture. Comparing the year 2011 to the year 2001, there has been a significant drop. If I remember the figures, 72% of people claiming to be Christians has dropped to 59% in England and Wales. The number of people who profess to have no religion at all has gone up from 15 to 25%. This is an indication of a movement within just 10 years. In other words, there is a clear demographic shift in understandings of the religious dimension. And it confirms, of course, everything we know from almost every other direction. I mean, we only have to look at the state of this building to be reminded that many churches are in a state of decay. The last time I actually stepped into an open church for the purposes of just personal curiosity, I found what you would expect, one elderly clergyman and maybe 6 or 7 elderly ladies. And that is probably indicative of what the church represents for most people today. The reality, of course, is that religion is on a very shaky ground. Now, does that translate into being God is past it? Well, we could all, of course, be mistaken. We could all be making a catastrophic error and that we're all being held together. On the other hand, this could be the age of enlightenment really getting into its stride and these old ideas dying. Now, God. Let's come back to God, because, whatever we think, he may exist, of course. We all be wrong. This God character has had what you could call quite an illustrious career. He's lasted thousands of years. Well, at least something called God. It's not always been the same thing, of course, and that's the real characteristic of God. It's this malleable, changing idea, or set of ideas, ever migrating, ever morphing as society itself changes. I mean, if we go back to that stage when there was that fierce and violent tribal god called Yahweh that animated the Jews when they went to war. I mean, at that time he had to share heaven with God knows how many gods. Hundreds of them. Everybody had their gods. Every grove, every tree, every brook. Because it was the explanation for things that people didn't know. Now, from that stage, of course, God has moved on. He's become many other things. For example, one of his big promotions was to become an imperial god, the god of the Roman Empire. What a leg up for this tribal god of the Jews. Suddenly he was the universal god, and all the other gods got their notice. They were all finished. And strangely enough, people managed to get by without them. But this one God hung on there, or was elevated there, as the supreme creature, overlooking the entire world, and of course backing the powers that be, in the form initially, of course, of emperors, and subsequently, of course, of kings. Always God was there supporting the powers that be, and making sure everybody kept in their place and did what they were told. Now, that God has continued to evolve, gone through tremendous battles of ideology among those who seem to think they know God and speak for God. God has now changed beyond recognition. He became a more liberal humanitarian God when society began to humanise and become more liberal itself. But God hasn't stopped there. In fact, God hasn't had any choice in the matter, because we began to think, we began to develop science, we began to understand the world, and suddenly this God that was doing everything and watching everyone was doing less and less. Suddenly he wasn't the person that sent the weather. He wasn't the person that caused illness. He wasn't the person who punished people. These were all understandable in very mundane scientific terms. God had to retreat. And no longer was he just up there above the clouds. Suddenly he was in a separate domain. And yet, as science evolved its understanding of the universe, this picture of God has had to be shunted further and further from human perception. So where do we go now with God? God is still evolving, of course. Just recently I've been reading some of the stuff by the people who have really taken objection to terrific writers and speakers like Dawkins and Hitchens, Christians and believers of God who've come back with the retaliatory strike, the Dawkins delusion. Is God a delusion, etc. This idea that you can revamp God. And of course they argue that people like Dawkins have completely missed the point. God is not there to be scientifically analysed and assessed and measured. He's in somewhere totally different, beyond our understanding. God has now got so remote. How can he be approached? Well, according to these people, he's approached by intuition, by hope, by simply the inspiration of mystics who have an inner understanding. I mean, it all really is dependent on a tremendous will to believe in God, which, of course, many people have. Many people have that desire to believe. Because, of course, living with reality means living with the certainty of our own mortality. Tough, but there it is. What can we do about it? It is almost certainly true that that was the origin of God. When people first became self-aware, they invented a spirit dimension to cope with the trauma of knowing their own mortality wasn't far away. But okay, we can't change it, we have to live with it. But obviously many people won't live with it. Many people will prefer the soothing notion that they will go to somewhere nice with their loved ones now dead but restored to them. It's a comforting notion for many people. Not everyone can cope with the reality of what has been described by Dawkins, of course, as pitiless indifference of the universe. But frankly, it is. If you stand out on the beach when the tide comes in, it'll wash you away. It won't care how good you are. It is pitiless. It is indifferent. But we can manage that. We can live with that. Now, the reality of the fact is, I've come to this point, is that most people, whatever they will say in a survey of do you believe, are you a Christian, what have you, actually live without God. You know, today you won't get many people following some of the notions you'll find in the Christian Bible that if you're sick, go to your priest and have him say a prayer. They will actually prefer to go to the doctor and to the hospitals. They don't rely upon the scientific understanding as presented in the Bible. They know that won't work. They know that the world is not flat. They know that the earth cannot stand still. They know it's a mythology. Clergymen know it's a mythology. There is a tenuous basis now on which belief in God survives. Certainly among the educated nations of the West. Of course, in every primitive society or less developed society, God still has quite a following. It's quite frightening to see the size of congregations in places like Nigeria, where they are still in that hot gospeling period. But it's interesting to see that even in America, which has, of course, given us all a lot of concern for its strange infatuation with God and Jesus, that even in America, the level of non-belief is increasing considerably. And I'd like to think, and I believe this is probably true, this lurch into fundamentalism that you see in some parts of the West is the death throes of a movement in trouble. And it's interesting how it now goes about marketing itself. It's stressed upon charismatic leaders and the charismatic movement, or Pentecostalism. You get infused with the Spirit. It's less concerned with theology. It's less concerned with maintaining its stories of virgin birth and the rest of it. It knows those ideas won't wash. Instead, it says, feel the Spirit. Feel the infusion of God. Embrace the Christ within. We're all part of the divine. This is the new marketing policy. And of course, it is appealing to people who would find a textbook on science quite challenging. Belief comes at a low cost. You can all get swept up in hysteria. We can all get swept up with the idea that the Lord is touching me or someone's laying on of hands. And you can convince yourself, no doubt, for a while. You may even overcome a small psychosomatic condition for a while, but reality will dawn. The godly die just as regularly as the non-godly. So we are living in an exciting time. Yes, it's not a straight progress that those of us who grew up after the war with the scientific revolution in full spate, the idea of science and the new frontier in space, we saw it as a continuous progress in which religion would slowly fade away. Well, of course, it doesn't cooperate quite that readily. It is, in fact, following the path that it's always followed, wiggling and twisting in order to stay in business, adapting, modifying, doing what it can to embrace the modern world in order to stay in business. But any which way you cut it, it is true that religion is actually on its last legs. It is, as we say in this motion, past it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. Stephen, can I now invite you to present the case for the opposition?
Okay, now then, this is a jacket off scenario, I'm afraid. Well, I'm very interested to hear. It was an eloquent case put by Ken. Mind you, he didn't actually stick to the point. The motion I was given to prepare for this evening was God is past it. Well, that quickly became, is God past it? And he then ends up by saying, is religion past it? And coming up with the answer, yes. God and religion are not the same. And if I've learned anything over my years, nearly 40 of them now as a parish priest, it is that I am learning more and more and more about life and about God all the time. I'm not going to get into arguments about whether God exists or not. We'll all come to our own conclusions and we'll never convince each other. So I'm not going to bother with that. I am, however, going to bother with the way in which God is often presented, because that's where the problem lies. One of the first things we're told in the Hebrew Scriptures is that we are made in God's image. The trouble is, human beings over the centuries, over the ages and so on, have tried to make God in our image. That's where the trouble starts. Because if we try and make God in our image, then God becomes us. And we don't become God, if you see what I mean. He takes on our prejudices. So if, for example, you happen to think that you are going to find out the secrets of modern life by being a dedicated Daily Mail reader, then God, if you are making that kind of assumption about him, you're going to become a Daily Mail reader too, and will actually take on the views, the opinions, and dare I say it, the prejudices of the average male reader. And the same would apply for the Guardian, the Sun, and so, well, the Sun's not really a paper, is it? But anyway, it would apply like that. God is, it's not God that is past it, it's our ideas about him. Now, when I started out in ministry, I had a very, very narrow definition of what God was like. And I preached and proclaimed that for a good wee while. But as I went through, life taught me differently. I used to be fairly strident in my strictures against homosexual people. And then I discovered that one of my best friends was gay. He'd never made a move on me or anything like that. But it was just the way it was. And he came out to me and said, "Do you hate me?" And I said, "No, not at all. How can I? You're my friend." Now, some Christians, some people of faith, because we're not just talking about Christianity here, we're talking about faith in general. Because there are many ways in which God may be approached. I'll come back to that. The way in which we look at God, the way in which we think God thinks, is constantly being challenged by what we are being presented with. God is not made in our image, we are made in his. And if you are willing to keep your mind open, I've found over the years, then you learn more and more and more about what God might be. I say might be because it's a journey of discovery for everyone. And I don't care whether you've been a Christian or a person of faith for 5 minutes or for 50 years, you're always learning. You're always finding out something new. It's not true, actually, that the Scouts are dispensing with the oath to God. They are launching a consultation as to whether they should, which is not quite the same thing. And I can only speak to Ken's experiences as a rebellious cub, and who hasn't seen a few of those in our time. The fact that he was banned from belonging to the Cubs rather than because he wouldn't go to church parade was because it was a closed group, and that only people who went to church could enter. Scouts don't have closed groups anymore, and jolly good thing too. God is not prejudiced, people are. God is not narrow-minded, people are. God is for equality, for fairness, for justice. And I say that with some considerable embarrassment, being a minister of the Church of England, bearing in mind that my organisation negotiated itself an exemption from the equalities legislation, and has also today, as you've heard, I've no doubt, been banned specifically from being able, if we wish, in conscience, to conduct the marriage of gay people in church. Now, I'll readily admit that a few years ago I didn't think that way, just as I didn't think women could be ordained to the priesthood or indeed become bishops. I have changed my mind. And I have not just changed my mind because it was inconvenient or because I was following a social trend. I firmly believe that that is what God's will is. I have looked at the scriptures, I have looked at my experience of life, and I have changed my mind. And it's often assumed that if you are a person of faith, you have an adherence to a very narrow set of beliefs and a very narrow set of ways of doing things, and you always believe that your way is the best. Well, I'm afraid I never believed that. And as I've got older, so I've got very much more prone to say so out loud. I believe that God is like Birmingham. Hold that thought. God can be approached by many ways. Some will get you there quickly. Think of the M1 going to Birmingham. Or you can go by a more scenic route. Or indeed you needn't go by any established road at all. You can hack your way through the urban undergrowth and make your own way by your own route. But eventually you'll get to Birmingham, if that is your goal. God is so much bigger, so much wider, so much more relaxed, so much more open to everything than we human beings tend to be. We tend to think it's a matter of believing in God or not. It's actually not that at all. It's about living the best life we can, the best way we know how. For some of us, that involves religious belief. And if that is so, then it should be an intelligent religious belief. It shouldn't be taking anything for granted. It shouldn't be saying, oh, well, the Bible or the Quran or whatever says, and therefore I believe it. If you don't believe it, or if you find it difficult, if you don't understand it, take another look at it. Keep on looking at it. This is what avowedly non-religious people do. They learn from life. They learn from their experience. So do people of faith. And they reinterpret their faith by their experience, and their experience by their faith. So is God past it? I don't believe so. Are our ideas about him, or her, or it? God is not gender specific. Are our ideas about God past it? More of them than we might like to think, I suspect. The fundamentalist, well, he or she have a right to their opinion. I don't happen to share it. I'm on the journey which has gone in a different direction. If he finds happiness, if he finds fulfillment in fundamentalism, good luck to him. The other thing that we must not do in trying to work out our way towards God is to, as I've said, say that our way is the only way. I'm very happy that there are other people of faith, some of them represented in this room, who are following other traditions. I would no more dream of trying to encourage them or indeed tell them that they shouldn't be following that particular way, they should be following mine, than they would dream of saying it to me. Be in the world, to be a human being, to be part of society, is to be on a journey of discovery. And part of that journey involves God, willy-nilly. We have to learn more and more about God, just as we will learn more and more about everything else. And he is not going to be past it, but our ideas may very well not keep pace with him. God is not in some world apart on his own. No, he's here with us. If I'm right, and if the Christian perspective on it is right, then he'll be here in each and every one of us. We may not like it, we may not find that comfortable. I personally don't always find it comfortable. It holds me to a standard of living and a way of life and principles and moral beliefs and so on that sometimes aren't comfortable. And God is not the sort of person who is going to consign Ken to the eternity of hellfire just because he doesn't have any time for it. The great thing about my boss is that if we don't have any time for him, he never stops having time for us. Now that might be a way of looking at things that you might not have expected to encounter from someone in my profession, because we get a terribly bad press, and sometimes rightly. But hold on to this, ladies and gentlemen. God is God. He is infinitely bigger and than anything we can ever conceive or think of. It's not him that has passed it, it's our ideas of him. And at that point, uncharacteristically for a clergyman, I shall sit down, I think, before my time.
Indeed. Thank you, Stephen. It's now your turn. Gentleman there.
This is an interesting topic, isn't it? Is God past it? I'd like to approach it in a slightly different way. I think what we need today is the gospel of the 21st century, which goes something like this. It's not new. You've all heard it. Christ said, love your neighbor as yourself. Do unto others as they would do unto you. You know, that's his gospel, not mine. But that is a gospel, is universal. You don't have to follow a certain religion to believe that. You just have to respect that you're dealing with your fellow beings and humanity itself. Thank you.
Gentleman at the back. Yes, lady in the second row there. Yes, gentleman here. I can see a hand at the back there. Yep. Gentleman over there, thank you. Gentleman here. Yes, lady in the middle here.
I'm very interested to hear the speaker for the opposition, that he didn't believe that God will consign to everlasting damnation. He doesn't believe in him. I'd like to know where he thinks Ken will go if, when it gets to the end of his life, he's still unrepentant and dies an atheist. I would like an answer to that.
Thank you. Gentleman at the back there. Gentleman over there, please, thank you. Any lady here, and I think we'll make that the last contribution from the floor, please.
If I can get to my feet. I've had the benefit of a very thorough religious education. My father was a Roman Catholic. My mother was an Anglican. They sent me to the Methodist Sunday School, I think because they wanted to have a bit of sex on a Sunday afternoon. When I was 14, I had a conversion experience at a Billy Graham meeting, went to Baptist church for a year where nobody spoke to me. So I'm pleased to say that when I was in my 30s, I discovered that there was such a thing as humanism. And I thought, how amazing, this is what I've been all these years. I very much resent the suggestion that people who live without faith live without purpose. I feel much, much happier and more purposeful in my life now, despite having come through quite serious illnesses in the last couple of years. I am facing my own mortality with equanimity, living every moment to the best of my ability for this life and the people who share it.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. That's been the most extensive range of contributions from the floor for a long time. It now falls upon Stephen, please, to summarise the position for the opposition.
Well, do you know, I'm not sure that I want to summarise the arguments against the motion. I want to do some responding to some of the very interesting questions that I got asked. So I trust you will allow me that latitude. It may lose me the motion, but who cares? And the position that you're in, sir, where you're not sure about religion or God or anything like that, but you'd hate to live in a godless society, sir, you are a natural Anglican. Anyway, you asked, how do I know God? Well, through experience. The experiences I've had in my life. I can't go into them now. I've only got 5 minutes. But the basic feeling of being cared for and looked after and loved, and not just by my wife, not just by people who are my friends, but by some kind of higher power that looks after me. I can't go into any further detail, and I can't allow you to come back on that. Now, the evidence that you want, Mr. Stovall, I think it was, praised Ken for having based his remarks upon the Bible, which provides evidence about God. No, it doesn't. It provides evidence of what human beings down several thousand years have thought about God and have perceived God to be. It speaks of their perceptions of God. It does not speak necessarily of God himself. Which leads me very nicely to the lady who asked where I think Ken is going when his mortal life comes to an end. No, as far as I believe, Ken will return to where we all return, which is to the presence of God, to be in some way reunited with the essence of God, which is not bodily, it's not personal in that sense, it is a state of being. And if you want evidence, then think about those who have had what are called near-death experiences. Yeah, I know. Oh, isn't it, you know, but my wife's had one. You can believe it or not as you like. That's the wonderful thing about it. We don't know for sure. I believe that Ken is loved by my boss. God will never give up on him. It's very, very clear to me that God is love. Now, what else? The church has been an instrument of social control for good and for bad. God hasn't. Again, it's been human beings interpreting what they believe God is like and what God wants. What else? I think I'm going to close, ladies and gentlemen, by just saying it's up to you to make your minds up. And isn't it great that you have the choice?
Ken, over to you, and you have 5 minutes to summarise the
Thank you. Wow. What an interesting selection of comments. Where to begin? Well, I think I'm reassured by these last comments. I mean, I'm going to heaven. How? I can be an atheist all my life and I'll still land up in heaven. Yippee. And that's on top of having Christians all over the world praying for me for years. It's obviously having some effect. How interesting that almost anything now can be God. How damn convenient. We can believe almost anything and we're still on the programme. I think we had the analogy climbing a mountain our own particular way. Some going the long way to Birmingham, some going the short way to Birmingham, but we all get to Birmingham. How delightful, how delightful. It's also reassuring, but also nonsensical. What is it of anything when it becomes everything? What have we actually got? Well, I'll tell you what we've got. We've got God and the religion that feeds on this notion in crisis. It's in terminal crisis. And this strategy of saying, well, it'll all work, anything will do, you can all be members, you can be gay, you can be any colour, any theory, any approach, it's all acceptable because we're so damn desperate to survive. You're all welcome. This is what we're really dealing with. We're dealing with a church and an institution in crisis, and they make this God figure into anything now. I've come across some notions for God, such as God is love, right? Kick that one around. That's what we've all got within us, love. So God is love, some nebulous, universe-filled love. God is consciousness. It's consciousness. Whatever we think, the thoughts that we have, well, that's all part of the God thought process. God is apparently goodness. That's what he really is. Dawkins is wrong leaving out goodness. The essential element of God is goodness. So he can be goodness. He can be almost anything. We've heard that he can be an Islamic God. Is that different from the Christian God then? Have we now got two gods? I mean, the danger I see, touching on that point, is of course civilization, which has allowed us the delights that we have, shortcomings that there may be, all the delights we have of the modern world come not from religion, not from God, but from humanity, from mankind, from science, from rigorous thinking. That is what has given us our modern world. The danger is when we have an Islamic culture swamping Europe with its intolerant attitudes that hark back to the intolerance of Christianity, that we will again sacrifice civilization, which happened once before in the history of the world. So that is a danger. We might all be very liberal-minded and tolerant now and happy-clappy, but there is a real and very pertinent danger present in this flirtation continuing with God. We see how it flourishes in parts of the United States, not as this liberal, all-inclusive, egalitarian type of God, but as a very vigorous, war-minded, Armageddon-directed movement from some of the most powerful centres in the Western world. That is the danger there. That is why we have to take issue with all these woolly notions about God, all this liberal, let's be inclusive nonsense, and stick with reality. And reality is that God is finished. It is the end of the day for God, and let's hope that we can bring this about as soon as possible. Thank you very much.